Welcome. Now, why is the music continuing? There we go. Okay. Welcome. Now, why is the music continuing? There we go. Okay. Something very, very odd is happening. Let me just get rid of, I've got to have another post open, another page open, something that is causing this echo. Where have I got? Can you believe? All right, I'm just going to start shutting everything down. If it's not, I was just backstage. I was just chatting with my guest about tonight's show, and nothing was wrong. And we go live, and guess what happens? It all goes horribly, horribly wrong. That is hilarious. I'm hunting for I got it. It was a YouTube page that had the stream up. That's what it was that was causing the echo. Okay, we're good. We're done. We've killed the gremlin. Goodness. It's funny how it just, the best laid plans of mice and men, isn't it? All right, Michael Angelico, you're absolutely right. This is going to be awesome. I was just having a quick chat with Gigi Foster before the show. We were already laughing together. We were already having a great time. This is going to be an amazing show. And Gigi Foster is one of the few people who can genuinely claim the title of I was first, right? Like there's not a lot of people in the world that can do that. I was one of the first. I spoke at the very first anti-lockdown rally. I put out videos in March 2020 saying, hey, the lockdowns are the wrong idea. This is the wrong approach. There are very few other people in this country who can say, March 2020, I nailed my flag to a mast. And Gigi Foster is one of them. I'm really, really looking forward to this. Now, I'm going to give another minute or two for more people to join us. Aaron, mate, great to see you. Aaron, great to see you. You know why? Great to see you. All right, stick around, buddy. Tonight's going to be a good night. Always a good time with Topher. Thank you very much. Tim is laughing at my expense because I'm a technological numpty. We all know that by now, surely. Brew is actually great coffee. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm glad to hear that, Lizzie. Many other people are as well. If you say something stupid, we get to hear it twice. Tim, you can rack off. You could go away. Blame the humidity. It is hot. I'm in the garage tonight. You're going to see me sweating. You're going to see me shiny. It is really, really hot. Am I having fun talking with myself? You know what? Best conversation I've ever had. Not going to lie. Happened to me the other day. I couldn't find it. Yeah, it took me a while to find that. It's worth saying it twice. You're just being nice. Where's the cigarette, old mate? I don't smoke cigarettes. I've never had a cigarette in my life. I've never had a blunt. I've never had ice. I've never had meth. I've never had cocaine. I've never had any of them. Cigars, they're my one thing. Well, okay, cigars and alcohol. They're my two things, okay? I don't do anything else. Judy B, I love Gigi. Listen, with good reason too. With good reason. Daniel, nice to see you, I should say. Simon, evening to you. Helen also loves Gigi. Hey, Topher. All right, Topher, thoughts on the floods in Vic and New South Wales. Look, tonight's probably not the night for that. We're probably not talking about that tonight. We talked a bit about that with Senator Jared Rennick and with Senator Alex Antic before that. But tonight's probably not going to be the night. I'll check with Gigi when I bring her on. Maybe she's got something to say about that. But look, tonight's probably not going to be the night for that. Thank you for doing this. Topher says, Ishtar, look, it's my pleasure. Genuinely, it's my pleasure. I get to talk to people like Gigi Foster. Do you have any idea how much that just makes my day? This is my pleasure, 100% my pleasure. Daniel says, hope you're well, Aaron. Yes, indeed, we all do. All right, too many comments. They're all just pouring in, so I can't even keep up. Listen, tonight is brought to you by Brew Australia. You saw in the intro brew coffee being made, brewaustralia.com. Subscribe now. We do have some room left for a few more foundation members, so get on board while you can. The foundation memberships are going to be closing soon, and everything's going to get more expensive. So brewaustralia.com if you want to support my work, if you want to support what I do. All right, sponsorships aside, tonight I'm talking with Gigi Foster. Now, I'm going to level with you here, and even Gigi doesn't know this. She's going to be shocked to hear this. She's listening right now. She's backstage. when I first came across Gigi Foster, I really didn't rate her. I didn't. I think it was probably 10, maybe 15 years ago, something like that. Around about the time when I first became a political commentator, I was like, yeah, whatever. Okay. Yeah, whatever. And I never reconsidered. You know how we can be? We can be kind of closed-minded. Like once we've made up our mind on somebody, we just kind of go, yeah, okay, whatever. And I didn't. I was quite closed-minded. I didn't reconsider until COVID came along. And as you know, I was I was among the first people to speak up. I wasn't the first. I'm not going to claim that status, but I was among that group of people that spoke up before it was cool, right? And all of a sudden, there was Gigi Foster. And not only was she speaking up, but she had way more to lose than I had. She's a lecturer at university. She's respected. She's earned over this amazing career that she's had. She's earned so much respect. She had so much more to lose than I did. And that's what forced me to reconsider Gigi Foster and to go, who is this woman? Who is this lady? What does she stand for? What is she actually about? And I discovered that I was wrong to judge her in the first place. That actually the basis, I don't even remember why I kind of went, yeah, okay, whatever. But I did. I don't remember why. But I'm so very glad and so very privileged to have Gigi Foster on my slow chat tonight. So with a couple hundred of you already watching across all the different platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the rest of it, with a couple of hundred of you already watching, you know what? I should probably stop piss fighting around and bring on the one, the only Gigi Foster. Gigi, how are you?
I'm great, Topher. Thank you for the very lovely introduction. It's very kind, and I don't blame you at all for not rating me. I mean, many things happen over the years, and you know, particularly in this day and age, we often make snap judgments about people, countries, positions, political parties, you know, and you just have a lot of information to take in and make judgments about. And honestly, COVID has been a period that I had never expected would happen, just like most of us. And I've been able to be very lucky to be in the position I was in at the beginning of 2020, so that I could actually take that role that I've played. So thank you.
I definitely want to talk about that, because I'm fascinated about what made someone like yourself. I mean, I spoke out, but I had nothing to lose. I'm a nobody. I'm just some weird ass YouTube influencer, whatever the hell this is that I do. You had so much more to lose, but I don't want to start there. I actually want to start with the very first comment of the night, which was nabbed by James Morrow, who jumped onto YouTube at 10:56 a.m. It was not even 11 o'clock this morning when James Morrow jumped in and got the first comment of the day. He said, I don't take advice about virology and epidemiology from economists. Now, I find this really interesting because I've had long chats with John Humphreys, who's also an economist. The name will be familiar to you. I don't know how well you know him, but we've had long chats about what economics really is and what it represents. How would you, Gigi Foster, respond to this criticism from James Morrow?
Well, I would say there are two possible approaches to that question, or that statement. The first is to say, well, I don't take economic advice from virologists or epidemiologists. And much of what was done during 2020 and 2021 was economic policymaking. It was not just about health. It was affecting directly the economy. So from that standpoint, you could sort of hit a punch back to the puncher. But I would say more sort of deeply, and perhaps with a bigger horizon, that sure, everybody who is a specialist in a particular area thinks they have a right to say something about that particular area. But when we are making decisions for the entire society, and again, this is not just health that's being affected by the various policies that were enacted, we need to consider all of those specialities and take all of the perspectives on board. And that was conspicuously what did not happen during COVID. So sure, basically the virologists were asked, but they were almost the only ones who were asked. What happened to all the psychologists? What happened to the economists? What about the sociologists and the anthropologists and the social workers? And what about the unions? And what about the many representatives of teachers and students and various different consumer groups? I mean, what about everybody else, basically? So really what happened is that the virologists and epidemiologists got to run a show that was affecting everybody else in many ways beyond health. So it became a kind of obsession only about that professional group. And so, yeah, from my perspective, it's not that virology and epidemiology don't have something to offer, but what they have to offer is limited to those specialities. And maybe we'll talk later about what economics is all about. And in some sense, economics is the discipline in which you'd expect to see the broadest perspective that considers costs and benefits to all people, all groups, all different slices of society that are going to arise from a particular policy.
Look, I plan to spend a lot of tonight listening, but there is something I would really do want to say here. I had a revelation some years ago when I realized that economic trade, money, is a language. It's the most useful way to think about it is as a language. When we appreciate what someone is doing, we give them money. We're saying thank you. We're saying, please keep doing what you're doing. Please continue. Please do more. When we look at someone and say, actually, we're not going to spend our money with you, or we go to a pizza shop and the pizzas aren't very good, so we never go back, right? There's a language. We are telling them something. And money understood as language is the most powerful concept that has shaped my thinking around economics for the last, I think it's been about 10 years since I had that little sort of mini revelation. And money understood as language makes economics one of the most relevant disciplines of all. Because once you understand economics is actually just the art of understanding what we're telling each other with money, then we can learn so much, no matter what's going, whether it's an epidemic or whether it's an economic crisis, whether it's a war, etc. We can learn so much from what we're telling each other with our money. Now, before we actually get started, I mean, that was a sidebar. That was the very first question that got asked. I thought I'd give James his little moment in the sun there. I am really curious because from my perspective, this conversation came about. I've been fascinated by your work since you came out on COVID, since you forced me, and I'm so glad you did, to reassess you and to put aside the judgment that I'd made, I don't know, in like 2012 or some crap like that. And you forced me to put that aside and go, hang on, who's this person? I had to reassess. I'm so glad you did. But actually, this interview specifically came about because I was in a crappy food court about 150 meters away from the CPAC conference in Sydney earlier this year. And I was with someone who's been following me for many years, and we'd agreed, hey, we're going to have lunch on this particular day. We're going to go out, we're going to talk and actually meet properly. Like, he's been emailing, he's been messaging, he's been on my, like, commenting, blah, blah, blah. He's been one of my most amazing supporters and followers over literally a decade. So there I was with him, getting to know him for the first time face to face. And this person walks up to me and goes, hey, would you be interested in doing a slow chat with Gigi Foster? And I'm like, yes. Like, come on, seriously. But how do you know Gigi? And he's like, yeah, well, I'm married to her. I'm her husband. And he just spotted me in the food court. So from your perspective, how did this conversation go? What happened there?
I mean, it was just something where he was there and, was having a good time, enjoying I was at a yoga retreat that weekend. I make it a point to be politically independent and to not just seem politically independent, but truly be politically independent. I don't give money to any particular group. I don't support any particular candidate. I just don't do it. And the reason is because I have felt that I'm most effective in these sorts of public policy debates when I can credibly claim that I just don't take sides on politics. And that's kind of part of the academic mission and all that. So it was literally just chance. He wasn't stalking you. I can tell you that. It was definitely not a stalking situation. Just happened to, wander around. Oh, there's Topher Field. He was probably also said hi to James Morrow while he was there.
Probably. Look, it was the most wonderful happenstance. And I do know exactly what you're talking about. Sorry, 1 second. Critical moment.
Yeah,
in the lighting of the cigar.
I know.
I do know exactly what you're talking about. For over 10 years, I did not become a member of any political party. I support gun rights, just as one example, okay? I don't know where you stand on this, but as one example, I support gun rights. I think that our gun laws in Australia are too restrictive, but I've made the choice not to become a gun owner myself. I don't have a gun license. I don't own any guns. Why? Because I'm more effective as a gun rights activist and advocate, being able to say, you know what? I don't own any guns. This isn't about me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is about the principle of the thing. So I completely get where you're coming from. I'm not sure that I believe you when you say that he wasn't stalking me. I just, the jury is still out. But enough fun. Oh, sorry. Daniel is asking what I'm smoking tonight. I'm having a Nub Sumatra. A lovely, lovely nub Sumatra. Nub is one of my favorite little sort of sub brands. There's a sub brand of the Oliva brand. They make absolutely wonderful, wonderful cigars, in my opinion. Enough about the cigars. You made the comment, Gigi, that you were in the right position to be able to speak out about COVID in 2020. I'm fascinated to know what you mean by that. What is the right position?
So it's a multidimensional statement. So I have in mind several different things. First, I think, and probably most importantly, in 2020, the beginning of 2020, I had been already a student of power, loyalty, love, group influence for 15 years, both in my own research and with many other co-authors. For example, actually, I've got here a book that came out in 2013 with Paul Frieders, my friend and co-author, right? That thing, that's An Economic Theory of Greed, Love, Groups, and Networks by Cambridge University.
Have not read, have seen, it's on my list.
Oh, there we go. So that is essentially a big social scientific treatise that tries to reckon with these big crown jewels from other social sciences: love, power, dynamics of various different social events and phenomena, which just aren't really well reckoned with at the moment in standard mainstream economic theory, right? And trying to bring that into the rubric and into the umbrella of economic thinking, because we both believe very, very powerfully in sort of the capacity of the economic approach to deliver good advice, essentially, for societies that want to maximize human flourishing. And that also, by the way, is the goal of economics, right? People think about, is it, profitability or maximizing GDP per capita or something. We sometimes go for things like GDP per capita, but that's because that's easily measurable. The thing that economists actually want to maximize is total social welfare, however you want to, then talk about what is that exactly. But it's something to do with well-being or happiness or thriving, flourishing, quality and quality of life, and a good quality life. So that is the thing we're going for, and we feel we can do it better if we have a better grasp of these kinds of fundamental human motivators, such as love, right? Which just doesn't make a showing in most mainstream economic theory. So having studied these things, right, for 10 or 15 years before COVID came along, I was already primed to be seeing the power of loyalty, right? And thinking as a behavioral economist about psychological elements that are going on in people's decision-making. It's not just about atomistic, individual, materialistic wealth maximization, right? There's a lot of other stuff going on in the human heart when somebody chooses something. So I was still wrong-footed by the crowd dynamic emerging. I didn't pick that. Most people didn't pick it. In fact, I don't know anybody who picked it before middle of 2020, to be honest. But, that was the main thing that caught me off guard. The other stuff I was kind of already prepared for. So that's one dimension. The second dimension I'll say is that I had a bit of a lonely childhood. I was an only child. And from a very early age, I was in an all-girls school, and I was excluded from all the, girls, like popular girls crowd group things, right? And I was, too smart. I was always a teacher's pet. And so I learned early on as a coping mechanism to, instead of, being part of those groups, to be able to look at those groups as if you're looking at an amoeba under a microscope and figure out what you're doing, right? Why is she doing that? Why would she say that? What's happening there? What could she be wanting? So I was kind of already getting into the habit from a very young age of analyzing people as if they were, experimental participants, right? For me to look at and figure out what was happening in the world. And I also remember from a very early age, my mother asking me at one point in the car, well, Gigi, what do you think the point of life is? And I would have been like 10, right? And I just, without even hesitating, I came out with, well, to make other people happy. I mean, it was obvious to me, right? At that stage. And then she said, well, what about yourself? And I sort of had to reconsider, because it hadn't really occurred to me. So there's something in my nature, right? And then when I took economics as a class in my undergraduate days at Yale, I wasn't going to become an economist. I was going to become a comparative linguist. I was going to do French and Russian, simultaneous translating at the UN or something like that. And then I just shopped this micro class. And I remember walking in and thinking, oh, this discipline has already codified the way that I think. Yeah. Great. Right? And how do we maximize what we get for everybody out of the scarce resources we have? Perfect. That's exactly what we should be doing. Right. So I'm just a really good fit for that kind of analysis. So that's probably the second thing I'd say. I'm used to that kind of, through the looking glass attitude, rather than being as influenced by groups around me. I don't really care if people disagree with me. And I was raised in a family, extended family, where a lot of conversations would last well into the early hours of the night about politics, religion, philosophy, whatever, and we just had fun talking about stuff with each other, even if we would disagree. And it was considered, a consumptive activity to do that. I enjoy it. I enjoy engaging. I learn something every time I have a conversation. And, and I think that's really a lost art often in today's world. So, so for those various reasons, I think I was just in a really, good position. And of course, being at UNSW, having an independent platform already, I was running my radio program at that time. And that's why in March 2020, I could go on air and say, without pre-warning my producer or my co-host, lockdowns are not the right response, right? We should be aggressively protecting the elderly and let everybody else get back to work. And that, needless to say, did not fly very well. And that was the kickstarting of my career in COVID.
That's why it's your radio show at the time. It's not your radio show now. Yeah. Look, I hear you. Look, the trolls are out in force tonight. I've been having a great time. I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm having a great time reading them as well. Right. And I want to bring up a comment here from Gary Zanoni. Cigar makes you look like a tosser. I am a tosser. What's your point? So it makes me look like what I am. Yeah, great. Well done, mate. Slow clap. Okay, so it's one thing to be in a position where you can, but you still have to have the reason why you want to. Why did you actually think that it was something that was necessary? Why did you identify it as the wrong strategy in the first place and then feel the need to call it out?
So those are two different questions. So in terms of why it was obviously wrong in the first place, it was just obvious to anybody who was thinking about what makes human thriving happen, that if you lock everybody in their homes, and just with no end game, by the way, and stop the economy, right, and stop people coming in, that's going to have massive costs. And if you looked at the data in March 2020, I'm sure you did as well, it was clear that we weren't possibly going to get anything like the benefit from that, even if we stopped all COVID cases, because COVID just wasn't that big of a deal. Certainly not for people who are, 50 and under and healthy, right? And maybe for the elderly people, yes, we should have focused more attention on them, but we should not have stopped our whole economy, right? So it's just pretty obvious from the beginning, from the get-go, look, this is just wrong. And it was obviously being fueled by fear. And again, I've studied fear a lot, so I know how dangerous it can be if it's misdirected, which is what was happening. So it causes you essentially to just push everything else that normally matters under the carpet, out of the way. You just ignore it, which means you're ignoring, again, huge inputs to human thriving. Anything other than COVID was basically just shoved in a corner. And so that's now what, the consequences of that is what we're feeling now. So I think that was why it was obvious. I mean, you felt that too, I'm sure. Like there were a few of us around the world who are like, well, this is nuts. There's no, and then the question was, who says it publicly? I guess I just felt like maybe I was just naive. I just thought like, well, nobody's saying this, so I better say it. Why is nobody saying it? I don't know, but I'll just say it. It didn't really occur to me that, I'm going to get this pile on of hate. I didn't think about that. I really didn't. It wasn't something, because it's just not that important to me. What's much more important is trying to actually, speak sense. Like, come on, people, like wake up, please. And I love Australia, and I love the West. I love the US. That's my country of birth. And I this whole time it's been like watching the Titanic sink. How can you not say that the Titanic is sinking? Hello, people. Hello. Like, what are you going to do? Just sit around? I mean, and also, how can you sleep at night if you don't actually speak out about this stuff? And then it was getting the reaction from everybody else. That is what started to teach me, right? I started to learn, whoa, okay, these people's minds have been captured. They've been disabled by their fear, and now they've been captured by some crazy ideology. And then that was what formed the crowds, right? And that was, for me, the biggest learning experience of this whole time.
Yeah. Look, there's some great comments coming in. There's Daniel and more in response to that criticism of me. You look like a tosser. Daniel has said, you must be new here. I've been smoking cigars and looking like a tosser for years, mate. You've got to catch up. But there's some really great comments here. There's one. Jessica J6 is a perennial troll here. Where was she during the pandemic on mainstream media? Yes. If I had the opportunity to be on mainstream media, I would have been there as well, but no one invited me. So I'm going to stand on the biggest platform I can get my hands on at a time like that. Tim Molesworth is saying, Topher, are you sure she's a professor? She's making sense.
Look, I sympathize with that comment. I got to say, I super, super sympathize. A lot of my co-economists in this country have really let the team down, I feel. And yeah, in terms of the mainstream media, I was on 60 Minutes actually in sometime in 2020, and I was on Q&A on ABC 4 times over the 2020 and 2021 period. So every time they asked me, I went on, right? So anytime anybody would ask me, oh, I don't care. Like, I mean, I'll absolutely be, you know, the Christian in the Lions, because again, nobody's saying it. Somebody's got to say it. Like, right?
I actually think it was one of your appearances on Q&A that actually broke my wrong preconceived idea about who you were. Right. I think I saw a video. I get sent and I get sent more stuff than any human being can watch. I've got a life. I've got a family. I'm trying to run a business. I'm trying to stay sane. But for whatever reason, when your name came up, I think because I'd seen you on a couple of articles, and I was like, oh, that's weird, because I thought she was like some loony, and you were talking sense. And then your name came up on one of these videos on Q&A, and I was like, okay, so it seems like she's talking sense. She's gone on Q&A. Either this video is going to prove to me that she really is the loony that I assumed she was 10 years ago, or it's going to prove that I was wrong to judge her so harshly, and you proved me wrong. And I'm very, very glad you did. Now, I want to pick up on this economist issue, because you've used a little bit of language along the way, not a lot, but a little bit of language that's a little bit foreign to, let's just say, normal people.
Yep.
Economists, I'm sorry to say, you're not normal. You're talking about at the margins, and you're talking about kind of these weird kind of concepts. Can you define what is economics? What is an economist? And why should ordinary people give a rat's about what Gigi Foster, economist, has to say about the world?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Economics has not just a poor reputation, I think, but a very inaccurate reputation in Australia, particularly. As I said before, a lot of people think that we're just about profits, or we're just about, you know, corporatism or neoliberalism, whatever that even means. I don't even know what that word means. I've never known. Something to do with money, usually. My father used to ask me for financial advice up until about 10 years ago. I finally beat it out of him. You know, I hire financial managers to manage my money. Like, I don't care enough about money. I'm lucky enough not to have to care about money, you know? So economics is the kind of the study of how societies and individuals allocate resources, which are scarce, across competing priorities, and in ways that can hopefully, if we are imagining that societies want the best for their populations, maximize the amount that we get out of those scarce resources, right? So I like to say that the fundamental idea of economics is trade-offs. Because resources are scarce, it means that when you give some money to one cause or one expenditure line item or one consumer good, you have to take it away from what you would have spent on another cause or expenditure line item or consumer good, right? Money doesn't grow on trees, right? So you're always making a choice between things. Secondly, you're always, when you're choosing something, you know, choosing to invest your resources in something, and that could be money, time, mental energy, anything, you are inevitably giving up the benefit that you could have had if you had invested those resources elsewhere. Yeah.
The opportunity cost.
That is the opportunity cost. And that's kind of a threshold concept in economics. If you don't understand it, you really don't get economics. But, you know, it's illustrated in a number of parables that are, you know, in our kind of founding classical literature in economics. And it really is core of the discipline, because it means that you're always, as an economist, looking for the best use of every marginal dollar. Rather than getting sucked into the story of how this particular cause or this particular line item needs more money and more money and more money. So when we're told a story about how COVID is really, really important and it's super, super bad and we have to really, really fight it, what's going on in the economist's mind is, well, what about heart disease and cancer and mental health and right, all the other things that we know need to be serviced in order to support human thriving in a world of scarce resources? And the more and more resources that get sucked down the drain of COVID, the fewer and fewer are available for anything else. Yeah. So there's the trade-offs issue, there's the opportunity cost issue, and it's really it's a lonely profession done well, because we're never fully in anybody's corner. You know, we never want anybody to get as much as they would want, right? Because we're trying to get for everybody the best, which means that no lobby group is going to, you know, get a full coffer of what they're asking for. So nobody really likes us. They sometimes see us as disloyal. In fact, there's a deep loyalty in economics to the group, to the welfare of the whole group. And that loyalty, that commitment is what makes us speak out in times where we feel that the welfare of the group is threatened, such as with the COVID crisis, where we were essentially betrayed by our leaders. So again, for another professional reason, I had to speak out, right? And I was very dismayed when more economists didn't join me.
Look, can I use one illustration? I mean, there's the Laffer curve and a bunch of other things that even for the layman, we can still grasp with just a couple of minutes explanation. We can kind of go, oh yeah, I get that. But I want to make an illustration of what economics does and the importance of understanding it. So if I were to say to somebody, education is incredibly important, and the money we spend on education more than pays for itself, the vast majority of people would mindlessly just say, yes, I agree. But let's get a bit more detailed about that. And this comes out of a conversation that I had with John Humphreys. It's not exactly the conversation I had with him, but it's my mental working on what the concepts that he provided to me. If you had a society, let's say it's a city, let's say there's 1 million people in it, and there's not a single doctor. If you could send one person to university to study medicine and come out as a doctor, the value of that person far exceeds the cost of educating them.
Yep.
So then society gets excited and they're like, hey, if we just invest in everyone to become a doctor.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, and you're already laughing because you already get where this is going, right?
Yep.
By the time you got 50,000 doctors in a society of 1 million people, the marginal utility, the value of that person is diminishing because what they provide is already being provided by others. By the time you are training the 999,999th person to become a doctor in a society of 1 million people, their value is zero. You have wasted money on their degree. What you desperately need, for example, might be an engineer because you need a bridge.
Yep, exactly.
Right? That first engineer you train, you get massive returns on, and then it diminishes as it goes on. And then you really need someone to drive a forklift and drive a truck and to move some cement and to lay some bricks. Right?
Yep, exactly.
This is the job of the economist.
So that reasoning is there for the government when it's deciding across expenditure categories on hopefully its core business rather than extending into ridiculous overreach. It's also there for the consumer deciding upon which consumer goods to buy. It's also there for the supplier when deciding about how much input to use from each of the various categories of inputs, right? And the basic concept is you want to equate the marginal returns or the marginal value that you're getting from every marginal dollar spent on each of those categories, right? And because of the fact of diminishing marginal returns, that means, and of course it's going to look different for different inputs and everything, it means that you're maybe going to have a different stock of all the different choices, but you'll just get to a point where, for example, as a consumer, the next thing I eat, whether it's an apple, a piece of cake, a cup of tea, whatever it is, I will get the same in expectation, the same marginal utility, right? So I've optimized when that is the case. And if I start having a real craving for something, I know I'm off equilibrium, right? I'm sort of off the marginal thing, right? I need to sort of, no, I should have had more of that earlier. I screwed up a little bit or whatever, right? So that's that concept of equating the marginal value, right? That is absolutely something that's very core to economics. And it is, again, why we're never in anybody's corner completely. And we're thinking about long-term effects, right? When you think about education as a concept, we should invest more. Well, maybe, but it depends on how many hospitals you have. It depends on how good your roads are. It depends on so many other things, right, going on. So.
And it's, I've never heard it quite put this way. You're in nobody's corner, but that's so true. I know a number of economists. I've had reason to spend time with a number of different economists, and this is one of their abiding frustrations. And I think one of the reasons why you, Gigi, are a bit of a breath of fresh air. Because economists are in no one's corner, and because there are so many conditions and qualifications around what they want to say, it tends to make economists very bad communicators.
Yeah.
Economists and the public don't get on very well. And one of the things I appreciate about you is you've got a knack for acknowledging that reality and then somehow making it work anyway. And you really do communicate sort of in a really refreshing sort of a way. So you were one of the ones who spoke out early on in COVID. What was some of the blowback from that? Because, I mean, I know what I received. I have a theory, and so far it has yet to be proven wrong, that all else being equal, if you're a woman, you will cop worse from the internet than if you're a man, right? It has yet to be invalidated. But I suspect that given your profile, given the fact that you're a woman, given what you said and how you spoke out, I just have a sneaking suspicion you copped some blowback. What was that?
I mean, we'll never know because I don't have a twin man who, is just like me and speaks just like me and was there at the time. And I'm always hesitant to blame anything on misogyny or anything like that.
Sure.
And I was raised not to care about my gender.
It's
really.
not you. It's me that's blaming it on misogyny. I'm
That's
the one.
fine. No, it's fine. I know, but I just
women
what's
cock at
in my
work.
head is it's never been. I've never really interpreted any of it as misogynistic. Although a few people have come to me saying that, and actually saying that the Women in Economics Network should have called out some of the bullying and censorship and pillorying of me as misogyny, right? I mean, I don't know. It would be nice if they did, I guess, maybe. But, I kind of like to not distract the issue a little bit with gender, because I think it is actually a human problem. The censorship that we saw, the denigration, the bullying, what I experienced. So from that first moment that I spoke out on the ABC Radio National, on The Economist, which was my radio show, which who knows if it'll ever happen again, but Peter Martin, co-host. Yeah, I think he's a bit pissed off because we haven't gotten invited back for a 6th season after the whole thing is, this has all happened. But anyway, what happened after I spoke out there was that a number of listeners contacted the ABC and said that woman is a danger to public health. She needs to be taken off the air. And of course, I was very happy to compose responses to all of those people who wrote in, right? And so I did, and we didn't take me off the air. We finished the season, and I just kept saying the same stuff basically, but in various forms. And it's very important to me to try to engage with people who are not sort of in the choir, right? Because otherwise, what is the point, right? And even at that point, I could recognize I'm kind of right in the middle of the ABC, like. There's a lot of people who didn't agree with me, right? A lot of people, including my co-host and my producer.
And
so
you knew that in advance.
Oh, absolutely. I think it was likely. Yeah. I was likely, but you always hold out hope. Like I thought maybe they just, they can be convinced. I was at that moment. It was at that time when sort of everything was quite fluid. It was still March, right?
So you were naive. You when you said earlier that you were naive, you were naive. See, not even I fell for that one.
Yeah, no, I admittedly, I'm very happy to admit I was a bit naive because I believe, I'm very kind of, I don't know, I'm a bit gullible when it comes to believing in people. I really want to believe, I want to see the best in people. I give them the best shot, right? The principle of charity, right? I just, let me see what you got. And I'm willing to be impressed, like impress me, right? So there was that. Then of course, as the months progressed and I went on Q&A and then I went on 60 Minutes and I did all the various other things, I got, a lot of hate mail, but I got even more love mail. I would say about 20% of the mail that I got was hate mail and about 80% was love mail. Some of the stuff that I received, like if I'm ever feeling bad about myself or when I get to be 95 years old and, riddled with cancer or whatever, I just read that, I'll feel great, right? It's just amazing the stuff that people wrote. But the more negative stuff tended to be shorter. It tended to be things like, go home, you neoliberal Trump cannot death cult warrior kind of thing, or, Granny Killers Unite or whatever, right? And so I would always respond, again, just like, hello, thank you for your email. It seems I haven't reached you. Let me try again. So, and then I would just have information and maybe once or twice I would have actually changed somebody's mind through a correspondence back and forth, but most of the time I never heard back. I also got a few death threats on my voicemail at work. And I received a toilet roll with Donald Trump's face on it. I don't even know what the message was of that. Apparently I was defamed on Twitter, but I'm not even on Twitter. So I never saw that. That was my friends telling me. I don't know. Who cares? Yeah, exactly. And I'm not on social media that much, right? So, I have a LinkedIn profile, but I don't have anything else because I just don't have time in my life. And I just don't want to spend my life doing that. And I think maybe that protected me a little bit because I just didn't, I didn't have, there wasn't the vehicle to abuse me, I suppose, that there is for some people. So probably I would imagine you were on more social media channels, so you may have received more abuse. But honestly, I never got anything saying, that bad woman or that the women, God, here goes another stupid woman. I never saw anything really triggering the right. So, but who knows? Maybe it was unconscious. And God knows. I don't know.
It's interesting. Look, so early in COVID, I was the one checking all my social media. That's not the case anymore. I've got a wonderful assistant who checks a lot of my social media, checks my emails, does all of that for me. That was a decision that we made. We spend the money. We've hired this person to protect my mental health, basically, because it did start to take a real toll. But I remember after I spoke at the very first, to my knowledge, to be clear, there may have been one, but to my knowledge, the very first formal anti-lockdown protest in the Southern Hemisphere, as far as I'm aware, on April the 25th, 2020, I was a keynote speaker there, and I received, it never quite rose to the level of death threat. Death wishes is what I would call it. Okay. I received many death wishes. People hoping that I would get COVID and die, or my family would get COVID and die, or various other lovely, charming things like that.
Yep.
And a few people trying to be clever. You get these people who really think they're a lot smarter than they are. It's this funny thing. It's like the Dunning-Kruger effect, but with IQ,
Yeah.
right? The people who are like on an 80 IQ are the ones who think they're 140. It's just this amazing, amazing thing. So I've experienced a lot of that, but I do think, and I've had the opportunity. There's been a few women who are on social media who have become the object of the hate mob for various reasons, and they've turned to me for support for various reasons. And when I look into their social media and I look at what they receive, I do think there is some merit to the idea that there is another level of viciousness reserved for women that they would never quite say to me.
Yeah,
maybe. Just, psychologically, they're different.
Yeah, I think it depends also your style. Like, I'm very male in my style, and like I prefer the company of men. Actually, I just find myself more comfortable when I'm with men. And I was raised with like a lot of older male cousins. Like, I didn't have any female cousins. And so those people I was having those conversations with, up to the wee hours of the morning, they were all cousins and, obviously other family members, but who were very gentle and sweet, wonderful people, but also smart and very welcoming. And I was welcomed almost like a brother, and I just never thought I was raised by a man who was kind of an extreme feminist in the sense that he just really didn't see gender. And if anything, he loved women just to the bone. I mean, really loved women, his mother, his wives, me, and he saw such potential in them. And just, he never ever once gave me the impression that I couldn't do something or be something or say something because I was a woman. So it just never occurred. My gender just didn't factor in really to my professional activities. It really hasn't, even to now. It just had, for me, it's not an issue, but I know it's an issue for a lot of people. And so they will see that. And when they see me, they're seeing a woman speak. They're not seeing an economist speak, right? I do recognize that intellectually, but just emotionally, I find it funny more than anything, because, I see people. Like, that's what I see when I talk to somebody. I see them as a person, right? And because there's much more difference actually within gender, I find often, than there is between. I mean, you and I probably have more in common than I would have with any random woman plucked off the street, or that you would have with any random man plucked off the street. Honest,
look, so you're absolutely right, and this I find the same with race, the same with age, the same with so many of these different things that are used to divide us.
Yep.
And one of the silver linings of COVID for me, and we're digressing now away from kind of where I wanted to go, but I'll get back to where I wanted to go. One of the silver linings, excuse me, has been that we've been forced to find each other.
Yes.
The people that are actually on the same wavelength, we've been forced to find each other because so many of the other people have been taken out of our lives.
Totally true. I mean, that's been one of the most wonderful gifts during this period, and not just in Australia, right, but all around the world, that the people you meet, and just the diversity of experience and perspective and, just background. I mean, it's such a wonderful, enriching experience. So yeah, I mean, my social circles are completely different now than they were. And probably, better actually, for my own personal development and my own education in this life, and my ability to achieve things that are good for people. Right. I think it's just been amazing. So I completely agree. And I think, it's really useful and psychologically comforting to have those networks, but also really important for what we need to do, right? Because for the next 10 years, we're going to be trying to recover from this and rebuild our societies, right? And so we need people to be working together, and to be collaborating. I mean, that's the only way you get stuff done. You can't move mountains as an individual. So I think it's wonderful, and I love seeing all these new channels, that are popping up, and all these new groups and organizations, AMPS and AMN and Gaia and all these places. I may not know all of those, but there's plenty of these kinds of like little resistance groups all over the place in all different areas, for all different kinds of services and for all different kinds of professionals who have been basically abandoned by their peak bodies or their normal professional groups, who are just now tainted basically with the whole COVID madness. So it's refreshing. It's like a new dawn, a little bit of a neo enlightenment kind of period. So we need to keep that momentum going and see the value of those things. It's a hugely valuable, kind of organizational push that we are seeing now, and we have seen for over a year here in Australia and overseas, just to try to get resistance causes off the ground a bit more.
Yeah. I'm going to give some trolls another moment in the sun here because it's just too funny. I just can't not. Timothy of Cox says Topher is a gynocentric, spineless man. That's particularly funny given how often I get accused of being a misogynist. Like, it's just hilarious. Jessica J6 says, why is she on a slow chat talking way too fast? Jessica, if you can't keep up, go and do a line of speed or whatever the hell it is that druggies do, and you might be able to keep up with a normal person's brain for a change.
No, it's okay. I will apologize for that. It's something my students often say, I speak too fast. And one of them at one point on an evaluation form said, Alexa, please slow down to 0.75 or something. So I get it. I get it.
Timothy Cox chimes back in. He holds all women's opinions above men. It's funny because I've had other people sending me messages saying, you've interviewed 3 men for every woman. You're such a misogynist. And now you're here saying you hold women's opinions above men. You know what? I don't give a flying fuck what any of you think. Can I just be blunt? I really don't. It's just funny. It's fun. I love teasing you because you keep commenting and that feeds the beast. And that means that more people see my content. So please keep at it. Don't stop. All right, Gigi, back to you. I apologize for that little segue. One of the things that's really fascinating to me is it seems as though the sand is shifting now. For 2.5 years, we've had the science is settled. Yeah. You know, we know what these vaccines do. We know what masks do. We know what lockdowns do. It's all settled. And now, I mean, recently, the Atlantic article was an outlier. It's not representative of the greater body of sort of pro-government intervention opinion, but it's an interesting outlier, where they're basically saying, hey, we got a bunch of stuff wrong, but you should forgive us because we didn't know at the time, even though people like you and I were literally screaming it from the rooftops from March 2020. What is the current state of science? And what do you make of this shifting landscape?
So on the point of the current state of science, I mean, that is a basically unanswerable question because science is not something that is fixed in some position of authority or in some, personified in an individual like Anthony Fauci, as he wishes to believe, or at any point sort of a kind of put it and dusted and done sort of box, right? That's just not what science is. Science is constantly evolving. It's constantly dynamic. It's a process more than a result. Yeah. And so, you happen to get sort of a current state of play, your current understanding of the closest you are at that moment to truth. But it's never settled. I mean, the things that are settled in science are like, for example, you should probably wash your hands before helping a woman give birth.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't talk about that anymore. Right. Right. The fact that we don't talk about it anymore tells you that it's basically settled, right? There's no real controversy anymore. But on many, many other issues, many other points about science, basically the field is still wide open. And if we don't continue to accept that, we will stop innovation, right? I mean, one of the things I like to say is that if you squelch minority opinion, you stop innovation because everything that we use today, every technology, every mode of thought, every type of material, everything was at one point a minority held vision, right? It was like, oh, I think maybe that might work. And it was only one guy or maybe 2 guys, right? It wasn't the whole crowd who thought that. And so if you decide to squelch stuff, you're stopping scientific progress, right? So you have to keep that open mind if you want to be a true scientist. So when you ask me what is the state of science today, I would say, what is the state of our understanding today about a variety of things, scientific and social? Well, first of all, we know the lockdowns were a really, 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 really bad idea. And we kind of knew that already, but we just forgot it for 2.5 years because we had already had that as an implication in our pandemic management plans, as you know, which existed before 2020, and we never followed them. So that's something that we certainly now know, having had this disastrous experiment and then having that experiment analyzed by teams around the world. And as you know, I've done that for Australia, and there's a couple of other
groups for sure tonight.
But then there's, a lot of other people in the rest of the world who have taken different approaches, which is great, but they all come to the same conclusion. So that is a pretty robust conclusion, which is that, we're pretty sure lockdowns are not the way to handle COVID. The second thing I'll say, in terms of masking, it's pretty useless. And that's been known for over a year. On the vaccine question, I don't think it would pass a cost benefit test for most people certainly
under 60, it would not pass a cost benefit.
There you go, right? And it's not just the cost benefit in terms of the person's health, but also the cost of making the vaccine, right? And administering the vaccine, right? That's something. And in fact, there have been billions of dollars spent of taxpayer money around the world on these medical products. And, without really doing, again, a cost benefit analysis. I mean, it seems like it's such an obvious thing, when you say it, when you think about it, well, of course, you need to know whether it's actually getting a good result on net, right? But we haven't asked that question. So This is what I now, in terms of where people are in the narrative. Certainly, Oster's article in the Atlantic is one kind of approach that some of the people who were complicit in this period will take.
And to be fair, that appears to me to be a minority approach. It's been overblown,
I would agree.
but it's one approach. Yes.
Yep, it is one approach, and I think it's almost like a trial run. And she sort of wrote that and like, let's see if this flies. Is this going to fly? Well, I don't know.
Not fly.
No, it did not fly.
It
didn't in the resistance, and it probably didn't even in the pro-government or pro-narrative side, because they probably thought, well, you've admitted things in here that we don't agree with. I can imagine some people saying that. Now, the maybe slightly more strategic people on that side who were, leaders or implementers or whatever during the COVID era, they will be scrubbing their posts. They will be basically trying to rewrite history, certainly in their own mind, and to the extent that they can in the written word. Some people will be claiming that they never really supported all that stuff. And no, you misinterpreted me, or we set this rule, but you didn't have to follow it. It was okay if you didn't, blah, 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 right? So all sorts of attempts to basically rewrite or sweep it all into the rug, right? So the other way is to flood the zone, right? Flood the zone with Ukraine and climate change and gender bending, whatever, right? Anything but COVID, right? Anything but COVID. And that's a really common strategy, right? That's super common. And you see that again among some of the craftier politicians. They know that the population's memory is very short, and they also, it's tiny, right? And they have a huge psychological incentive, the population does, to forget about all this as well, because a lot of them were also complicit. A lot of them were bullying their own family, their own children. They got, their own parents locked up in these old age care homes and just died alone because they went along with the madness. And now what, they're supposed to accept that they were part of this disastrous experiment? No, that's very painful psychologically, right? And so they too have an incentive to forget. So I think, one thing that might happen that's a danger is that we just forget so much that we never really, put the pain on the table. And we need to put the pain on the table, I feel, in order to be able to move on together as a united society. So that's a real challenge.
Gigi, you don't know this, but you're actually really validating what I'm doing at the moment. Battleground Melbourne as a documentary is all about that. It's not about dwelling on the past, but it's about saying, hey, we can't just pretend this didn't happen. Yeah. We've actually got to look at it. We've got to address it. I've actually been invited to speak. I didn't ask for this. I'm super uncomfortable with this, but I've been invited to speak at my church this coming Sunday and at a different church on the following Sunday, talking about the church's role in just rolling over and letting the government play God in our lives for 2.5 years. And it's going to be a really challenging message for a lot of the people there. I'm doing it with the blessing of my pastor and the leadership team at that church, and credit to them for that. But you're absolutely right. We have to find this balance. We can't be living in the past. We can't be stuck in the past, but nor can we just move on like it didn't happen.
Yeah,
that's not an acceptable way to deal with this. We've got to learn the lessons, because you can bet your bottom dollar that our politicians have learned the lessons, and the lesson they've learned is that they can get away with this.
Absolutely. And that's the danger. Keep wanting to get away with more and more and more, right? Because once somebody gets in power, they get that taste, they don't want to give it up, and they'll just try to transition the COVID crowds to some other obsession, such as climate change or some other thing, whatever, the bad Russians or whatever it is, right? And it's not just that it's not acceptable in some ideological way for us to sweep everything under the carpet and move on. It's more, the way I would see it is it's kind of analogous to if you have a relationship, right? And one person significantly betrays and wrongs the other one, right? To a large amount of damage. You can't just sort of kiss and make up after that, right? You have to have a conversation about it where the person who had the pain, who, is able to voice that pain, and the other person hears it, acknowledges it, and has the opportunity to apologize. And it's good for both sides. You need that healing on both sides, because everybody makes mistakes. We get that, right? But as humans, we need to see those mistakes in the sunshine and be able to recognize that's what's happened here. Yes, there were victims. Yes, there was pain. Yes, this was wrong. And we need to not do that again. And yes, those were the responsible people. They did this after apartheid, right? In South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation. And so that kind of feeling, I think that's what we need, honestly, in this country and many other countries around the world. And we're not there yet. But that's what I'm trying to work towards. And I think, the church, the involvement of the church is interesting, because I think the approach that is most likely to yield in the end a more united Australia is one of love. It is kind of a New Testament type of approach, right? It is not eye for an eye. It is not, let's go and, kill the head of the snake. There is no head of the snake. If you're going to kill that head of the snake, you're going to kill 80% of the people on earth, right?
Yeah,
because
right.
they all went right along with it, right? So I think that's unhelpful as well, to be like, well, who's the culprit? Which of the James Bond villains that we can pin this on?
Yeah, no.
Right? There's a lot of rich people who made a lot of money through a lot of loose alliances, sure, but there's no grand conspiracy that sort of planned this all and is trying to depopulate everybody. No, I don't believe that stuff. What's happening is people have gotten seduced into the crowd by being afraid, and then people who are opportunists took advantage of that, and we've destroyed a huge amount of welfare, and now our societies are kind of in tatters, and we need to pick up the pieces, and we need to work together to do it. So
yeah. Now, look, I agree. I'm going to bring up a comment here from VTB on YouTube. I disagree with this comment. We need justice, says VTB. This will only happen with trials and hangings. This is the Nuremberg trial approach, and I disagree with it. I agree, Gigi, with your reference there to the post-apartheid trials that happened. I think that's a better model for us to pursue, where justice was done. I've said for many years, the problem with politics today is that it's been too long since we tarred, feathered, and ran a politician out of town. All right. Running a politician out of town and saying, don't come back, you're not welcome here, is a different thing to stringing them up on a noose. And I'm certainly not ready to go to that level. There needs to be accountability, but not to that level. I don't think we have the moral imprimatur to do that, but we certainly need to be holding them accountable. I would love to see people like Daniel Andrews, my own state premier, flipping burgers at McDonald's. That would be wonderful to me. His public career should be over. He should never be able to hold a public office. He should never be able to receive taxpayers' money ever again in his life. He should go and work for whatever's left of his career. He should go and work as a truck driver or a burger flipper or as whatever that may be. But I certainly don't agree with this idea of this sort of vigilante justice. I'm not on board that. I want to rewind a little bit, Gigi, to the reference that you made to hand washing. I'm guessing the answer is no, and I'm completely fine with that. Please understand this is not a loaded question. But did you ever happen to see the video that I did in 2013, I believe, maybe 14, called The Forbidden History of Unpopular People?
No, but I bet you're going to refer to the guy who initially started to wash his hands before delivering babies. And
Ignaz Semmelweis.
Yes, there we are, by his profession.
Ignaz Semmelweis was his name. At the time, Julia Gillard, thanks to the Finkelstein report, was proposing this thing called the News Media Council. And I did a video about it, and I used Ignaz Semmelweis as my example. He was a madman.
Yep.
Who had this crazy theory around hand washing, and germs hadn't been discovered yet or invented yet, or whatever term you want to use, right? They didn't know about that yet. And so he couldn't explain why it worked, but he could show the data to say that it worked. Yep. And he ended up dying in an insane asylum. That's how extreme it was. He died, ironically, of an infection as a result of injuries from being beaten the crap out of by the guards in an insane asylum. And it was only about 30, I think, years. It's years ago that I did the video. My memory is fuzzy. I think it was about 30 years after his death that they discovered microbiology. They discovered germs. And all of a sudden, within 50 years of his death, hand washing was ubiquitous across the board.
There you go. Yep.
Listening to the crazy people. I'm not saying every crazy person's right. Most of them are wrong. But all of our progress starts with an outlier. I'm working on a book at the moment, Gigi, called titled "Good People Break Bad Laws." That's kind of my slogan. That's become my life slogan: "Good people break bad laws." But one of the chapters is titled "In Defense of Assholes." And it really is. It's in defense of these outliers, these people who are willing to stand up in the face of the entirety of society and all of science and all of what we know and say, no, you're all wrong and I'm right. Those assholes, 90% of the time they're wrong. 90% of the time they're effing crazy. 10% of the time they are at the cutting edge of science and they are the reason why we can advance. And for the sake of that 10%, we have to tolerate all of them.
That's exactly right. And that's the thing, right? People get seduced into this sense that, oh, it's just so inefficient to have to listen to all this garbage. Why do we have to have all these other people at the table? Why do you have to bring up the moon landing again? My God, why? Right? And it's true. It's inefficient.
Right? To have all it's frustrating. Yes.
Right at the table, right? And you have to pay that cost as a society if you want to reap the benefit, right? Which is, as you say, innovation, progress. It's basically all the things that have lifted humanity up in terms of its standard of living over the last, many hundreds of years. So thank you very much, progress. But that was because people were willing to stand up and have a different idea, right? And they weren't completely shut down. So yeah, I think that's one of the main things we need to be teaching our kids more, really, is the value of diversity, the value of tolerance. I mean, we know tolerance is an important thing. I certainly learned that when I was in school, but we don't learn it explicitly now. We sort of learn how to get along with others, but often that means just keeping our mouth shut and going along with whatever the others are saying. That's not how you are actually loyal, again, to a group. Loyalty to a group means looking out for what the group needs, even if the group doesn't see it, even if they're going to shout you down while you're trying to help them, while you're trying to save them. You still, with your last dying breath, you say, you really should wash your hands. Please do it. Please save all those babies and all those women, and it's a wonderful person who will do that.
And that's why Ignaz Semmelweis ended up in the insane asylum, because he was writing letters that in the end, because he was ignored over and over again, eventually the letters that he was writing towards the end, they were brutal. They were him saying, you are killing these women. That's why they locked him up. It turns out he was right. That's just the reality. Now, speaking of people who are right, Gigi, you recently published, I'm just going to bring it up here. You published a cost to benefit analysis on the lockdowns. Can you tell people, how can they find your executive summary? Because that's available to all. And what is it that you found when you did a cost to benefit analysis on the lockdowns?
Sure. So first of all, this was work that sprang from my testimony to the Victorian State Parliament back in August 2020, when David Limbrick invited me to address the Parliament. And I was happy to do so. And I basically said the lockdowns were a bad idea. And I followed that up with a submission, which included this 4-page sort of proof of concept cost benefit analysis that set out the way in which one should do the analysis. And again, in my naivete, I was hoping that the government would take this and be like, oh yeah, right, this is what we should do. Thank you for telling us, And I don't know what I was thinking. Anyway, I'm just blind to some of those, again, I see the best in people, right? I just expect them to just, take it on board, right? Engage, right? Anyway, so I wrote that thing. And then that was only written after months of waiting around, right? That's August 2020. So I've been waiting for months for the government to justify these unprecedented policies and restrictions of our freedoms. And nothing had been forthcoming. So I thought, well, to hell with it. I'm just going to write it myself. So I, wrote this thing and then was waiting around, expecting that something more would be coming out, hopefully along those lines. Nothing. And finally I was like, okay, well, somebody's got to write this thing. So I was able, very luckily, to hire Sanjeev Sablock, whom you may recall was a Victorian Treasury economist for a while, until mid-2020, when he started speaking out about how he thought Victoria was, essentially betraying its people, and Victorian State Treasury didn't like that very much, so they parted ways. So he was without a job.
Sorry. Can I pause you? Can you put a pin in your thought process there, because I do want you to pick it up. But Sanjeev Sablock is a fascinating character to me, because I remember when he quit, and I remember thinking, oh, this is the beginning. This is the start of the backlash. It turns out he was basically alone. And of course, the machine was very quick to badmouth him. Oh, he's just an attention-seeking whatever. All of that followed very quickly after he quit. Just for my own sake, because we've not had this conversation off air. In fact, today is the very first time we've ever spoken. We spoke for about 5 minutes before we came on air, and that's it. That's all we've ever spoken. Can you tell me a little bit about Sanjeev Sablock?
Look, he was for a while, when he was being groomed, he was destined for the Indian Public Service. He passed those exams with flying colors. So it just really the cream of the cream of the cream of the crop over there, and could have gone into Indian Public Service. But really, after having worked for years to try to fight the corruption in Indian politics, got frustrated and essentially just gave up, and then moved to Australia for a freer existence. Apparently, that was the goal: freer and less corrupt, right? And so we started working for the Victorian Treasury, and was basically one of the many nameless economists who work in the bowels of governments all around the world doing policy evaluation in normal time. So he was a perfect person to partner with, to help me on this cost benefit analysis, on fleshing it out, because he knew what the format of such a report would have to look like, that a state would normally produce. And I wanted to produce something that looked akin to that, right? That wasn't just an academic paper, that would look like, here's what we should have done, people, right? This is how it should have been done. So he's a bit autistic, and unbelievably hardworking. I mean, Topher, this man, he is a machine. He is just, I don't know when he sleeps or when he eats. I mean, he's amazing. I can't say enough good things about his conscientiousness and his dedication to the cause. And he really is just, honestly devoted to trying to do the best thing for Australia, right? To how can we be doing this to ourselves? He just keeps kind of hitting the head against the wall, right? It's almost like I can imagine him eventually in an insane asylum. Like, why didn't they listen to me? Ah, right? I can see that, right? But he's been wonderful. He's a great sort of partner in crime during this period. And he actually, after he left the Victorian Treasury, he went back to India to assist his family with some health issues back there, and also was working for me, and now he's working a bit for my co-author. So we're kind of trying to take care of our own a little bit, where we can, and collaborate, right? So yeah. Anyway, so he and I actually met. Yeah, I think we met because, well, he wrote a book. You probably know this, right? He wrote the book, The Great Hysteria and the Broken State, in 2020. Right, which was kind of his reckoning with what was going on, right? What has happened to our state? Why have all of these plans been rejected? Why aren't we doing the normal analysis of this policy that we would normally do? He was so shocked by it, really. So he's not as much the broad picture economist, I suppose, as maybe myself and my co-authors are, but definitely extremely dedicated and again focused on welfare, focused on how do we get the best for everybody with our policy.
Before we pick up your train of thought to do with your cost to benefit analysis, which I do want to continue with, I'm just going to jump in with a comment here from VTB. Now, VTB, I've not seen you around here before. And based on this comment, I'm going to assume you're pretty new. Anyway, Gopher, that's a very typical thing that people who want to troll me do. Yeah, sure, whatever. I could be Gopher. I don't care. Why are you saying nothing about the disgraceful misappropriation of public funds to Big Pharma? Are you new here? I've been banging on about this for 2 fucking years. Pull your head in. Spend a bit of time learning about the person you're trolling, for fuck's sake. Okay, now that I've got that out of my system, okay, would you please continue to tell us about the cost of benefit analysis, how people can find your executive summary.
Executive summary, sure. Okay, so the first thing I'll say to your troller, if you want to learn more about that, read this book.
Right, the great COVID panic, is that it?
COVID panic, yeah, I can't. There we go.
Yeah, great COVID panic.
So that is published with the Brownstone Institute, my publisher, Brownstone.
Yep. You've even got the mug. You must be serious.
I've got the mug. Yeah, they have merch. Anyway, in the great COVID panic, we do a cost benefit analysis of the lockdowns in the UK. We produce a little bit of a short version of that. And using the same methodology, essentially, as what I used for the Australian case. So that was also something I was able to use when writing the CBA for Australian lockdowns. Anyway, so Sanjeev and I worked on this for, the better part of a year, I suppose. And not expecting that actually it would be published as a book. I wasn't sure what was going to happen with it. But you can get the executive summary if you go to thegreatcovidpanic.com/news. That's where we've put up the executive summary. It's just free download for anybody. Connor Court Press published.
Sorry, can you say that again? I'm going to write that into the comments. Can you give me that URL again, please?
That's thegreatcovidpanic.com.
Thegreatcovidpanic.com. I think I spelled that correctly. That should be coming up in all of the streams now, so you can click on that.
Yeah, and then just go under news and events, and you can see it under news and events. Yep. So anyway, so we decided, we wanted basically this message to get out. So we released the executive summary, but then Connor Court was kind enough to, I ran into Anthony Capello, and so he's published that. So that's great. And basically, we take a very standard approach in the sense of looking at all the possible benefits that we can foresee from lockdowns and all the possible costs that we can foresee, right? And we have to choose currencies for these things. And the normal currency for a CBA would be dollars, or maybe sometimes QALYs, quality adjusted life years. We do use those currencies a bit for some costs and benefits. For example, for GDP or debt, that's money, right? But then there are particularly some costs of lockdowns which are not really well enumerated in those currencies. And so for those, we use a different and more recently developed currency, which was developed by my co-author Paul Freiders and his team at the London School of Economics in about 2017 or 2018, called the well-being year. And this thing, right, so this, you may not be familiar with it, is a new thing, new currency. But it is actually gradually seeping into the dialogue within governments in Europe, particularly about what governments should be on about. instead of just maximizing GDP per capita or profitability or whatever other thing, or, the reports that we give to upper, levels of the government, to actually be focused on human well-being, you need a measure of human well-being. And this is a really appealing measure because it's an overall one. It's built from a question that's on a lot of social scientific surveys today and over the last couple generations, which is overall, how satisfied are you with your life nowadays? That question, right, subjectively answered, it's answered on a scale of 0 to 10. It's kind of capturing all the bits and pieces that a person values. It takes seriously that somebody actually knows how well their life is going, right? And
the nature of statistics is, if you have one person answer that, it's a trash survey. If you have 10,000 people answer that, actually you start to get something that is actually valuable. See, that's really interesting to me. So quales I'm very familiar with. It's often what's used in actuarial work within life insurance companies and these sorts of things. But this is literally right now is the first time hearing of this, and I actually find it really interesting.
Yeah, so it's a really nice, I mean, it's not perfect, no measure is perfect, but if you have to use a currency to capture things like the mental health damage of lockdowns, right? You gotta pick something that you're going to be able to translate into dollars and into qualies. And the nice thing about the well-be is it translates well because, for example, a healthy person in Australia answering that question would generally answer about an 8, right? 8 out of 10 satisfied with their life, right? And in a place like Australia, we're well developed and, generally it's nice living. Somebody who is indifferent between living and dying answers usually around a 2. So, and as you know, one quali is one healthy life year lived by one person, right?
Yeah.
And so you can then say, well, one quali is basically equivalent to 6 well-be's, 8 minus 2 for the year, right? So well-being is one unit on that incremental scale enjoyed for one person for 1 year. So then, 6 of those units enjoyed for one person for 1 year equals one quali. And then, of course, we know that there's a translation between qualies and dollars because the PBS, the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, negotiates with drug companies all the time, buying drugs and interventions to get welfare for us, to get qualities worth of goodness, right? And they have a price tag for that, right? They have a max price, threshold price, which is somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000. So that means you can translate from well-be's to qualies to dollars. That means you're cooking with gas. That means you can then do this cost-benefit analysis using the native currency for each of the cost-benefit categories, right? Each of the cost categories, each of the benefit categories, and then sum it all up in whatever currency you want to use it in, right? You want to talk about it in, and you're able to compare apples to apples. So that's how we conduct this CBA.
I want to bring. I just can't not bring. I'm sorry. I keep feeding the trolls. I'm sorry, but because I feed them, they keep coming back and commenting, and that just keeps feeding the beast. So I'm sorry, but I can't help myself. Jessica 6J6. Gigi earns $200,000 a year now. Gigi, you don't have to comment on that. But Jessica, I hope she earns more than that, because there's this really weird thing that happens. When someone is more valuable to society and brings greater value, they get paid more. Now, that might be a foreign concept to you, but someone like Gigi, with her intellect and her insight and her forthrightness and willingness to say what is unpopular, I would hope is earning significantly more than that. That would be, I would hope, a baseline for her.
Well, actually, to be honest, Topher, I think I earn too much money. So my salary is set by the enterprise bargaining agreement at UNSW. Right. And I think I actually don't even know exactly what my salary is. I think it's around, I know that sounds like a very privileged thing to say, and it is a privileged thing to say. I think it's something like $260,000 or something. But then I get extra money from doing like expert witness reports and, consultancies, like not very many, but, occasionally a keynote speech or something. So like all up, I probably make like $280 maybe per year, something like that, Australian. Now I am putting 2 kids through college right now. So, that's a bit of, and one of them is in the United States, which is a nice chunky $75,000 a year. So, US. So, I have some expenses, but honestly, I do still think I'm probably overpaid. Like, and it's one of the problems, honestly, with our profession of economics, in particularly in the academy. We earn so much money and we have so much status, if we want to be a media whore about it, that we it attracts the wrong kinds of people for the wrong reasons. We should be sort of, given enough money to live, but just expected to just think and teach and do stuff and not have like a fancy lifestyle, right? I mean,
I am a capitalist through and through. I am an unapologetic capitalist. And I think, Gigi, you generate tremendous value. James Bennett's, I think, is completely right here. Gigi creates more than $200,000 in value every single year. Jessica says, I wish I earned that much. How about you try adding more value to the world around you? That might solve that problem. Okay, so I'm trolling the trolls, but let's move on. So I want to get your thoughts. We've touched on it already. This Atlantic article, we both agree that it's kind of an outlier article, but I'm really interested in this idea that there is a subset of the fans of lockdowns and these people who really championed all of that, who are now saying, oh, amnesty, please. Mm-hmm. What does that say about the psychology of where we're at in this movement? I mean, these people clearly they're waving the white flag, are they not?
A bit, yes. I mean, I think Foster definitely is. But it really, to me, it betrays a bit of naivete on her part, right? To sure. realize that, oh, I think maybe I made some mistakes, and then somehow think that you can just say that and everything will be okay. Like that was like a drunken, spree that you had, and you may have accidentally shot a couple people and raped a few more, but oh well, hopefully we can all move on. That is just amazingly naive, right? I mean, she just hasn't comprehended the scale of the damage, right? Or she doesn't understand the power of the anger that is now directed, very firmly against those who were saying these things at that time. So it's a bit odd as a response, honestly, and that's why I think maybe it's a testing the water thing. It's like, okay, well, let's try this. Does this work? Anybody? Yeah, but she can't hide it now. Like she's out there, so it's going to be an interesting.
Look, right there is a part of me that goes, okay, you know what? Respect, because writing that involves the acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Yeah. There is a part of me that goes, you know what? You're actually ahead of the curve. Like if she'd written that in 2 years' time, when the mistakes are going to be so obvious to all and completely unhideable, I'd have no time for it. But at the very least, she was ahead of the curve. She wrote it before most others were even willing to acknowledge that mistakes were made. I do have some time for it. Only a little, but some time for it. It's an interesting study in sort of the psychology of how this sort of goes. Now, your accent betrays you. I'm sorry to say that your background is from the US, and there's been a few comments. I haven't put them on the screen, but there's been a few comments and questions from here around, oh, but isn't she a Yale graduate? And, why did she come to Australia and all that sort of stuff, as though these are all automatic negatives. So would you share with us a little bit of your story, your background, how you ended up in Australia, and sort of what brings you here to what is obviously the pinnacle of your career, which is being on a slow chat with Topher Field.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
Why are you laughing? Tell us a little bit of the Gigi Foster story.
Sure. So, well, I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is a town in the U.S., obviously.
Which just re-elected Jolly, what's his name? Fetterman, yes.
Fetterman, yeah, right. It was an old steel town. When I was there as a kid, it was sort of recovering from its steel town days. It still smelled horrific. But we did win the Most Livable City Award in 1988 from U.S. News and World Report, so I was very proud of that.
I'm happy to say that Melbourne took that title off you.
Oh, well, there we go. So, but Pittsburgh, I mean, it was actually a lovely place to grow up in many ways, and lots of parks. And my mother was a psychologist. My father was an engineer. And really that combination kind of is what's in my brain and heart now. Sure. And I was, very, very, very lucky. I was an incredibly wanted child. I was the only child. I was conceived late after 5 years of trying, after they'd already lost one baby. I mean, it was, and I thought it was going to be a boy. They did an amniocentesis. They thought I was going to be a boy, but I turned out to be a girl, and my mother had always wanted a girl. And so it was just, the whole thing was like, oh my gosh, wonder child, right? I was loved to absolutely down to the ground. So I think that also accounts, in large part for my degree of I guess, I don't know if I'd say sang-froid, but confidence and ability to take some of the, the vitriol during this period, because I just see it as, too bad for those people. I'm sorry that they're so benighted and they're calling their fellow man, a granny killer. That's really unfortunate. I hate to see that in my world, Anyway, so I was educated in the US. Yes, I did go to Yale. I went to Phillips Exeter Academy before that, which is the most preppy, snooty-nosed boarding school that there is in the United States. And not because my parents were super rich. It just, I mean, I was smart enough to get in, basically, right? It was an academically very rigorous school, as well as being populated largely by, you know, families of the elite. And then I went to Yale because I could get in again. You know, I was smart enough to get in, but I wasn't legacy or anything. My parents, you know, hadn't gone or anything. And I really liked Yale when I toured it on my college tour, because there was a real value that came very clearly through in the tours and just the architecture and everything, of sort of bringing people together and for a purpose of service, you know. And Lux et Veritas is Yale's slogan, light and truth. And I thought, yeah, that fits me. And the slogan of Phillips Exeter was non sibi, not for oneself. And in fact, the slogan of my primary school was to be rather than to seem, esse quam vedere. And I thought all of those things fit me down to the ground. Yep, thank you very much. Right. So I don't know if it's because I went there that I became like that, or I was like that and that fit me, but whatever it was. Yes, Yale was full of a whole bunch of snooty nosed, you know, elite people. That's true. But, you know, I wasn't in the popular group at Yale either. Right. I wasn't in the popular group anywhere. I was generally hanging out with the artists. I did a lot of performing arts when I was in high school and college, which is another reason I'm comfortable, you know, doing the performance aspect of this kind of engagement stuff and the teaching and everything. I used to dance a lot. I used to sing, very musical. I did a lot of drama stuff. I did stage management and direction. I was a color soprano. You know, lots of stuff, right? Regarding performance.
You were a coloratura soprano.
Yeah, I was very, very high. You know, the super high ones.
No, that's amazing.
They're really, really high.
Sorry, this is completely unrelated. I was a soprano. No, don't laugh. I was a soprano in a local choir, very local, like very low grade, before my voice broke.
Oh, okay. Well, so was my son. My son actually
was in the soprano.
Yeah.
And then my voice broke. And unfortunately for me, it took about 3 years to actually break and settle. It wasn't one of those ones that just broke and happened. It took a very, very long time to settle. So I stopped singing. But I've always had this thing in the back of my mind. My dad's voice is amazing. He was on radio and so forth. And I've always had this thing. I want to get back to singing.
Yeah.
I never have, but it's just, it's a bug. And once it's in you, and once you know how that feels, it never leaves you.
Well, Topher, if we ever meet in person and there's a piano nearby, or even if there's no piano, we just have a pitch pipe or something, we'll sing together. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Deal.
So, yeah. No, I mean, I think boy sopranos are some of those beautiful sounds. So my son as well. I mean, he inherited the musicality from my side of the family, and he, you know, he's now actually studying music in Boston and physics as well. So anyway, long story there, but in any event, so I did all that stuff, and then as I say, I was going to be a linguist, but then I switched into economics. I actually switched into ethics, politics, and economics, mainly because I didn't want to take any more math. And the straight economics degree made you take math, and I was like, I'm sick of math. I placed out of all the advanced stuff, and I didn't want to take any more, you know. Yeah. So and then I went and worked for a couple of years in New York City. And I met my first husband when I was in university, and he was Australian, right? So we went to New York City together. We worked there a couple of years. We went back to Maryland so I could get my degree. And during graduate school, I had 5 years of graduate school training. That was the length of the program. And in those 5 years, I had my 2 babies. And when that was finished, when that program was finished, it was 2003. And we had been in the Washington area during the Washington sniper period, the anthrax scare, the 9/11 attacks, right? All that stuff. And I'd been having the babies, and it was like, do we want to be in this country? Like, is this really a good place to raise our kids, right? And I had always wanted to live elsewhere. You know, I thought maybe for a while I would live in France, because, you know, I had taken French since I was 5. But, you know, Michael didn't speak French. And so it was like, well, how about Australia? You know, so I ended up taking a job over the phone at the University of South Australia. I took the job there. I didn't fly out to Australia first, because I had a breastfeeding baby at the time, and I didn't know what I would do with her if I went out, you know. So I just took the job over the phone, never having set foot in Adelaide. So then we just rocked up, and that was, when was that? I guess, 2003. So I guess September, and basically the rest is history. I mean, I moved to Sydney in 2009, and so the kids were, you know, born in the U.S. but raised here, so they both have Australian accents, and they're now in college, and so I've been at UNSW since 2009, and just, you know, doing the standard economics professional stuff, obviously, but switched then, and basically just having a normal life, right? So there's nothing really that unusual, I guess, about how I live now. I mean, I live in a rented, you know, townhouse, nothing special. I don't have any big purchases or whatever. I I don't spend a lot of money on random stuff, and I basically just spend it on my kids or on doing things that I think are important, like flying to places to give talks or whatever, that sort of thing. So
yeah, it's one of the funny things, and I know that you're in the same position as I am largely with this. We show up in cities that we don't live in, and we give talks and that sort of thing, and we get the trolls online who are like, "Oh, you must be raking it in." We're like, hang on, I bought the airfare.
Yeah.
I paid for the hotel myself to go and talk for free to a group of people because I actually believe in what I do. And I actually think that what I say is important. And people go, "Oh, that's arrogant that you think that what you have to say is ever so important." Listen, if you don't think that what you have to say is important, fix your life. Right? If you don't think that the ideas that you believe in are important, go and get better ideas.
Yeah.
Right? It's just one of these amazing things to me. There I am. I'm up in the first time, literally the first time in my life that I've not had to pay for my own airfares, my own hotels, was at CPAC earlier this year. And that was where I met your husband. And that's what resulted in the slow chat happening. Every single speaking engagement before that, and in fact, every single speaking engagement, cinema engagement, etc., after that has been funded out of my own pocket. And I know that you're in largely the same boat, Gigi. Look, I would be remiss to miss this opportunity, given that the US midterms happened just yesterday, our time. There was this prediction of a big red wave. I was listening to all the pundits. I allowed myself to believe, hey, maybe this is on. Maybe it's going to happen. Obviously, the results are in. It didn't really happen. I mean, they took the House, but it wasn't the red wave that people were sort of talking about. So can I get your take as someone who has obviously was raised in America, lived in America into your adult life? What's your take on what's going on over there right now?
Well, I was also there earlier this year, I will say, on sabbatical. So spending some of my own money to be there, but also some conferences and whatnot. And it is a very polarized place at the moment. It's very fractured, right? It feels much more fractured. And the US has always had more inequality, of course, but I mean, that's really come out very strongly. And there's just, people in the same family won't talk to each other. It's sort of similar to after 9/11, there was a bit of that, and the Trump phenomenon even more so, right? And you had the never Trumpers and the always Trumpers or whatever. And now, my own first cousin, one of those lovely male cousins when I was a kid who used to talk with me until 2 a.m. and was just wonderful, and helped to train my mind, has essentially stopped talking to me because of my stance on COVID. He's a medical doctor in Florida, and he wants to talk badly about all the ways that DeSantis is ruining everything and all this. And I've tried to reach out to him with love, but he won't speak to me. So that kind of thing is just, it's happening more and more. And this notion of the othering of people on the other side of the aisle is just incredibly intense. So that's at the moment the feeling that you have when you're there. And I agree with you that the famed, the hoped for, I suppose, red wave sweep didn't happen. I think it's generally more of a quasi victory for the Democrats, given the fact that those expectations were there.
Given the expectations,
but DeSantis winning so roundly, I think, is a positive sign, because that shows you that if the people are shown an alternative that works, they will go for it, right? They will go for it, even if maybe they wouldn't have sought it out, or they won't have called out the wrong leadership if they had it. If they see a leader who's roughly on the right path, they'll say, yeah, I like that, right? And that kind of dynamic is positive. And one of the things I love about the US is that we've got basically 50 different petri dishes, right? 50 different little experiments going on. And so if you manage to get something working, I don't care in what area of policy, but whatever it is, if you get it working, the other states will look over and be like, oh yeah, why don't we try that, right? And it's like, it gives you an opportunity to innovate and to be seen to innovate and to try it out. People just have to sit back and watch. That's all they have to do to learn, right? And so I think that's probably a positive thing. I think probably it was negative for Trump because Trump's guy didn't win there. So if I'm going to say who is more likely to be on the Republican ticket now, DeSantis is looking a little more likely, I would say.
This has definitely helped DeSantis's cause, no doubt about it.
I think so, yeah. And no politician is wonderful. I'm sure that he's got all sorts of issues, and I don't agree with everything he says. But at the moment in the U.S., in terms of the front runners, I think he's probably the best of a bad lot. And and he certainly made a lot of sense around COVID policy from my perspective. So,
Yeah.
and in a way, because this has been the greatest peacetime policy fumble in our lifetime so far, I'm kind of prepared to make it a single issue kind of, voting scenario for myself and for,
Sure.
if I'm voting in the next few years. Like that is the most important thing to me, is like, you have to recognize the damage that was caused, and you have to recognize we have to never do this again.
Yeah.
So to the extent that people are saying that, I think that's a good thing.
So the key phrase I think that you used there is "so far." There's a certain ominous quality to the phrase "so far." Look, there's a lot that we could talk about there, but I don't want to taint the conversation and color the conversation with my own views. Why do you add the qualifier "so far"?
Look, there are many aspects of the world right now that are super uncertain, right? We don't,
Sure.
I mean, there's hugely impactful for human well-being, right? The key maximand that I certainly work for in my professional life, but also in my personal life, from my own family and whatnot. And so the economic uncertainty that you're seeing in the stock markets, in people's kind of sensitivity around investments and not knowing, people, oh, should we all go to gold now? Should we all, okay, what about these digital currencies? We gotta, are we gonna trade? Let's trade goats, I mean, just weird stuff, right? And people starting to talk about like, oh, and did you know about the aliens in Area 51? And obviously, 9/11 was totally fake. And so now we have to make sure that we go after the WEF people. And there's so much noise, right, about all these other things. And people are just losing track of, they're just losing the plot, as you say in Australia, right? Losing the plot. And that just causes this like static, right? And that's very disruptive to societies. It's very disruptive to the normal, everyday, boring functions of many aspects of our lives, which allow us to just get on with, contributing in the ways that we are best at contributing. And of course, the disruption to education for our kids, when is that going to get fixed? How is that going to it's not going to be able to be completely compensated for, but they're dealing with that, and they're trying to enter into labor markets that look completely different than they did previously. They have very bad habits. My university students don't even come to lectures most of the time, right? No matter how engaging we make them. There's very different notions and not quite settled new norms about what's okay, what's not okay. Like, are we all going to work from home? Or is the university or the organization trying to get us to the campus or to the office, but other people aren't going, so I guess I won't go. And then what's going to, right? So this is kind of lack of coordination going on in all sorts of ways, small and large. Obviously the Russia business over in Europe, right? How long that's going to last? A long time, unless Zelenko just cuts and says, let's make peace. At least I think that's probably what's going to happen. And basically Ukraine's being used as a pawn of NATO. And so there's kind of this gradual emergence of these blocks, the Russia, China, India block, and then the West, right? And that also is kind of an emergent thing. And so we aren't settled quite on that yet. And people are still wondering, and they're talking about nuclear stuff. And so there's just unsettledness, uncoordination, lack of coordination, and just uncertainty surrounding so many things. So when I say so far, right, you can't really pick, you can't really put a clear prediction on what's actually going to happen. The vaccines are another thing, right? We know that they've had really nasty side effects, and we know that they're probably, severely underreported, but we don't really know how bad those effects are going to be. And we don't know sort of how many more of these things are going to come out and how much more money is going to be spent. And we don't know whether the globalism is going to continue to increase. I do expect it probably will. And then what direction is it going to take? We're going to go towards the climate change stuff and this fantasy net zero stuff, like fantasy zero COVID, right? Are we going to go through, some other ideology that's divisive? I mean, because those are very divisive ideologies. I think the best ideology we come up with is something like that kind of, everybody is in it together. We are all different, but we can all contribute together and build something positive together and have a positive story of our nation and a positive story of where we're going. But most of the ideologies that get pushed on mainstream media are divisive. So COVID is obviously divisive, right? You're a viral vector. You're going to infect me, so stay away. The whole woke culture is divisive, right? Here's a whole bunch of people who are going to be triggered by that bunch of people if you say the wrong thing and whatever. It's a minefield. And the climate change stuff is also divisive. If you drive your car, you're hurting the world, right? So you better not eat meat because you're hurting everybody else, right? So it's all dividing people. And that kind of, the potential of that kind of divisive ideology has really been exploited during this period, and the elite people have seen that, and so they're going to be thinking, how can we continue to exploit this, the digital currencies, or God knows what other kind of agenda. So a lot of stuff is in flux. So this is why I say so far.
Okay, so that's a wonderful answer. I want to pick up on something that I haven't sort of checked with you in advance, whether you're happy to talk about this. So dodge the question if you wish. You mentioned the digital currencies. Central bank digital currencies are obviously a hot topic. There are trials happening in Australia. There's trials happening around the world. A lot of people lump them in with cryptocurrencies. They view Bitcoin as being the same as Ripple, which I would disagree with right from the get-go. And then all of those things being the same as a central bank digital currency. Can you, as an economist, and again, this is a question without notice, so go where you will with this. Can you break down a little bit, what is this evolution of currency, these digital currencies versus these central bank digital currencies?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of them in some sense almost invites the other one. So the digital currencies that were offered in the private sectors, the Bitcoin and whatnot, those things I think have been a catalyst for a process that was already started before they were invented, which is the escape of the tax base, essentially,
Sure.
from, from governments around the world.
Opting out.
And right. And the wealthy will figure out where to hide their money. They'll hire super smart tax accountants to work out how to evade as many taxes as possible. And it's the rich who have the money, right? I mean, it's like, why do you rob the banks? Because that's where the money is. Why do you tax more heavily the rich? Because that's where the money is, right? And if you want to support a state with some kind of welfare program, then, you need to get it somehow, or, and again, we can have the modern monetary theorist conversation another time, but, that kind of digital currency, the Bitcoins and the whatnots, they allow people to more easily escape, right? And Airbnb and Airtasker, any of these kinds of online platforms, which come without tax, right, are another mechanism of escape, right? And so governments around the world are essentially desperate to claw back their tax base. Digital currencies offer a way of doing that, of combating it, right? Combating the fleeing, the flight.
Central bank digital currencies you're referring to.
Central bank digital currencies, they provide a mechanism of capturing the tax base that has been in flight, right? Not just to Bitcoin and whatnot, cryptocurrencies, but also to, other online platforms which don't charge taxes, or, to the Bahamas when the wealthy people, hide their tax there, or whatever, had their money there, to the Apples and the everything else of this world that, don't pay any tax in Australia, even though they do business here, right? And so it's a kind of a natural reaction. It's kind of almost a defensive reaction by the nation state to say, hey, we want to be able to track what you do. So do it in our currency so that we can see it, so we can tax it. I mean, that's the motivation at the end of the day, right? It's about that tax. Now, am I worried that this whole digital currency wave is going to, the national digital currency wave is going to somehow impoverish individual people or make us unable to pay for our bread loaves or whatever? First of all, I think it's going to be very difficult for most countries to get rid of cash. I think they will face huge backlash against that proposal for all sorts of reasons. But secondly, if you think about it in the historical sort of time frame of many hundreds of years, most of the time that we've traded with each other, we have not used currencies issued by sovereign nation state governments.
Sure.
Right? We have used, in fact, goats, right? Or sprigs of parsley, or bits of whatever it is that we have that's valuable that we barter with each other, or commercial paper issued by some organization that we trust at the moment, right? Money is about trust. It is about trust. Fundamentally has to have trust behind it. And so there is the potential that people can develop trust in something else and use that as the vehicle of exchange or the store of value, right? And so the functions that money provides for us can be provided in ways other than just the standard national currency, whether it's digital or not. And so I feel that people will figure out ways to work around it, even if digital currencies come online. And I think it'll be very difficult for governments to force everybody to use only the digital currency, because there are simply too many other ways that we can escape. So I'm not as worried about it as some people are. I don't think it is as a great thing, but neither do I think it's the worst thing going around.
Yeah. I just love, sorry, my trolls again are just capturing my attention here. According to them, what you just said, I don't love CDBCs, but I think people will be able to work around them. According to them, there you go, pro CDBC. That's all it takes, apparently, for some of these morons to conclude that you're like, I don't know, in the pocket of the World Economic Forum or some shit like that. Look, I'm with you. The black market to me is the free market, and you can't say that, but I can. And the free market is the best market, and we should all be operating in it as much as we possibly can. Now, of course, I pay all of my taxes. Of course I do. But if it came to a central currency, a central bank digital currency, which gives them the ability, whether they do or not's another matter, but it gives them the ability, if they choose to decide how you can spend that money, to place limits on certain thresholds on certain things, carbon emissions or various other things at their reckoning. All we have to do is look at China, which has a social credit system, which is what a central bank digital currency would become. It would become a social credit system very, very quickly. And we can see there's some hilarious examples where tens of thousands of Chinese Communist Party senior officials, because it's a very large party, so they've got a lot of senior officials, have been misidentified and incorrectly punished under their social credit system. And the same thing would be happening writ large with any kind of a central banking system. Here's the thing. You mentioned before conspiracy theories. And I find conspiracy theories fascinating. And I think I align pretty well with what you said earlier, where I tend to be focused on what I can prove and what I can change in the real world right now. So that tends to be where I'm focused. I'm not focused on proving or disproving conspiracy theories. I'm focused on what's the real world that I can change right now. And in the real world, central bank digital currencies and social credit systems, etc., create an enormous number of problems for the people trying to administer them. And the technology is nowhere near ready. As advanced as technology is, the technology is nowhere near ready. And if they were to try and bring something like that in, eliminate cash and all the rest of it, the problems would be so monumental so quickly, they would be faced with a revolt on their hands. I will say that. I will say, though, I agree with this. I use Mr. Cash. I think the use of cash is good. The use of cash in the UK, just to name one place that publishes data, has jumped more than 5% in just the last couple of months, and just over the course of this year. More and more people are coming back to cash, and there's different theories on why that is. It's easier to budget. If your money is tight, you can budget better if you're actually using cash. That's one theory. Another theory is that people actually just want to show that they're using cash as a kind of protest against the idea of central bank digital currencies and these sorts of things. So look, I think we're faced with a really, really, really interesting time ahead. I think you're right. And what you said before about so far, I don't want to agree with you, but I do. That's the tragic reality. We're looking at moving out of the city, moving closer to where people make our food, having our own sort of water tank on the block of land, having our own energy store on the block of land, having things like that in place. These are not conversations that my parents were having in the 1980s and 1990s.
Yeah.
But they're conversations that we're having now, and I think that's a really interesting bit of social commentary right there. James makes a great point. Remember the MyKey rollout. Now, Gigi, you're not in Melbourne, but the MyKey rollout that's our public transport card that we use. We can't use credit cards like they do in Sydney. In Sydney, okay, so Melbourneites, let this blow your mind. In Sydney, you can walk up to one of those terminals, scan your credit card, and scan off where you leave, and you don't need some special card for the public transport system. Why didn't that happen here? I don't know.
Admittedly, Topher, that only happened after the rollout of the Opal card. So the Opal card is like your MyKey, right? So we had that first for like, I don't know, a year or something. And then it's sort of, that worked well enough that they were then able to add on the feature that you can now just, use a credit card.
Scan your card, yeah. And now Paul Vidovich, Topher is going prepper. So I did an entire slow chat dedicated to the idea of surviving in place in the event of a major weather event. And the example that I used was Texas. So Texas had a winter storm, what it would have been now, probably, I'm going to say 3 years ago, might only be 2 years ago. They had a winter storm that took down their entire power grid for some parts of Texas for 7 days.
Yep.
And a lot of people died because within 24 hours of the grid going down, they were in their car driving on the snowy, wintry streets, trying to get basics, food, water, nappies for their kids, medicine for themselves or their spouse. And they died in car crashes because the roads were not in a condition where they should have been out there driving.
Yep.
I don't think it's paranoid to say, hey, make sure that if the worst happened, you can actually be in your house for 7 days. If you want to go crazy, make sure that you can be in your house for 30 days, right? If you want to go crazy. Water, food, sanitation, medicine, basic stuff. right?
Mm.
It's we are among the first generations in history to not be thinking about this.
No, this
And
is true.
we think it's
Yep.
so weird for people to think about this.
Yeah, no, this is true. I mean, survival. Yeah, survival is an incredibly, important thing, right? And I think particularly if you're in a place like, Lismore here in New South Wales got hit by the floods multiple times over the last whatever it was year or something, and I can bet you that most people in Lismore are now actually, thinking in that kind of contingency planning way, because guess what? If an event happens enough, you start to realize, okay, this really is possible. So we gotta prepare. And I mean, when I was a kid, we used to prepare for things like, nuclear war, right? Remember nuclear holocaust? Everybody go under the desk as if that's going to help you, right?
Because
anyway,
the desk is going to make so much difference.
It makes so much difference, right? But there was also the fire escapes thing, right? It was like, okay, know where your fire escapes are. Have a plan for getting out of the house. I mean, do we even do that with our kids anymore? Do we even talk about what you would do if there's a fire?
I'm going to be honest. Growing up, I thought that spontaneous combustion was a much bigger problem than it actually is. I was led to believe that humans just catching on fire for no reason was like a thing. And quicksand, spontaneous combustion and quicksand. They were the two things.
I mean, I was scared of quicksand too because I watched The Princess Bride. And
yeah. And rodents of unusual size. How could you not be afraid of rodents?
Yes, yeah, they're very scary. Definitely.
Look, I'm sorry to do it to you, but I've got to give some glory time to my trolls again. VTB is back. Now, VTB earlier, I didn't put it on the screen, insisted that they've been following me for ages and they know my work ever so well. VTB objects to my reference to Texas and says they froze to death because of green policies. Go for you twittering fool. Yes, I made that point at the time. Hello, I made that point at the time. Thank you very much. Please move on. So we're in this really weird situation, Gigi, where, like with COVID, we have the authorities that be assuring us that they have everything under control. It was only a year ago that they were assuring us that inflation was not a problem, that there wasn't going to be inflation, and now we're there. They've assured us that the grid is secure. There's not going to be any problems. We just had a federal election here in Australia where they won in part on a platform saying that they were going to reduce the cost of electricity. And now they're pursuing policies that, of course, even better than I do, are going to increase the price of electricity. So stepping outside of the realm of economics for a second, because economics deals with sort of hard numbers and maths and actual stuff. What the hell is going on that we are electing in the US, in Australia, in the UK, elsewhere, these people that are basically promising unicorn farts? What's happening here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many problems really, Topher, with the political systems these days. But I mean, one very obvious problem is that most politicians these days are career politicians, unlike yourself. But most are really, they cannot claim to be representing anything other than their own careers and their own chances of reelection, right? And back in the day, back at the beginning of the nations that we now live in, the people who were politicians, generally speaking, had done something else first. They'd been farmers or lawyers or something, right? And so they represented that group and the interests and real life. They knew what real life was about, right? And even Margaret Thatcher, right? Well, you know how much a stick of butter costs, right? So you're kind of in touch with reality, right? In some way. And so that experience keeps you honest. And the fact that your friends, your family are in that milieu means that you are kind of representing that. Even if you lose touch with your constituency, your love connections are still kind of, in that group. They haven't all sort of been oriented towards politics, right? And so I think that's one big problem, is that we have politicians who simply cannot credibly claim to actually represent any part of the constituencies that they are supposedly representing. And the second problem is that the way we ask for democratic input in our countries today is almost exclusively via these elections that happen every couple years, and everybody has to do a mad scramble to figure out who's on the ballot in my section and who are these people anyway, and I don't know what's their policies on blah blah blah. Oh gosh, I don't know. Okay, we got to go stand in line and let's vote. Okay, hopefully that works, right? And that's almost the best case scenario, particularly in a place like Australia, where you've got the compulsory thing, and some people just literally know nothing, and they vote above the line with whatever policy, whatever party the people are talking most about on the air, or that they're hearing most about at dinner parties, or whatever. It's not really informed democratic citizen representation that you're getting often out of these voting exercises now, particularly because we're being bombarded with so much information, again, much more than we were in our parents' time. And so I think one of the problems, and this is something that we address in our book when we're talking about solutions moving forward, how do we need to rebuild or change our institutions, is to try to reinvigorate democracy by building in more direct democratic elements into the way that we run our societies. One of those suggestions is to use citizen juries, which may be a concept you may be familiar with. So essentially, like we do with criminal juries, right? There's a roll which consists of everybody in the nation, essentially. And once every, month or whatever, when somebody needs to be appointed at the head of some bureaucracy or some other state-funded large organization, a jury is convened, and that jury spends 3 months, a significant amount of time with maybe 15 or 20 people on there, figuring out who they want to put into that position. And it's not a political appointment, therefore, right? It's breaking the link between power and money and the position of authority over, a major part of the machinery of state that's supposed to be representing the interests of the people. So bringing the interests of the people in that very direct way. And we know how people behave on criminal juries. They actually try. I don't know if you've ever been served on a jury, right? But they really
I've not, no.
Actually, I would really recommend a movie called 12 Angry Men. It's from like the 1950s or something. Great movie, right? It all takes place in this jury room, right? And it shows you how seriously people, really took that responsibility. And they do. If they feel that something serious is being decided on the basis of their input, they will work harder than they would in an election, to figure out what's right or what's wrong, what should they be voting for. And if you do this, if you set up these juries, potentially once the system gets going, you could have hundreds of juries happening every year to appoint all the various different people at the top of the bureaucracy, the government bureaucracy, the big public media companies, the big, universities. My vice chancellor could be appointed by a citizen jury. You would gradually weaken the link between politics and these positions. And I think that would be a good thing. So that's one suggestion for how we move forward, because of course we know what happened during COVID. Much of the bureaucracy, much of the machinery of state got hijacked for political reasons, right? For reasons to do with power and money, not because it was good for the people. So how do we prevent that from happening?
Can I bolster that point with a very specific example? So I don't know if you know, Gigi, but I'm up on criminal charges from the Victorian government because of my role supposedly inciting opposition to the lockdowns and so forth in Victoria. My next court date's in January. It's been dragging on for over a year. It was, I don't know, it was late 2021 that I was arrested and charged. It's been a year. It's going to drag on for possibly another year. I don't know. But what's become very, very plain to me, and I've spoken about this with former and current police officers, by the way, this is not just me pontificating off the top of my head. I've had these conversations with people in the positions. The key problem is that ultimately the premier of the state decides which senior police officer is going to become the chief of police. Now, if instead, if you watch a show like Blue Bloods or these American type shows, it's not a political appointment that decides who gets that job. And if we instead, and I'm just going to take one example, and the unionist people amongst my audience will love this. Let's say the members of the police force themselves elected their chief of police, who was then appointed to be in that point role, dealing with, with the government of the day. That would very radically change the incentives and would make that role much more likely to push back and say, no, Premier Daniel Andrews, I'm not going to send my members out on the streets to start fights with people because they want to hold a protest against you. But for as long as that role is politically appointed, they have a very clear, very strong financial incentive to do whatever they're told to do by the government of the day. So I'm with you. I'm in furious agreement with you on that particular point. The American model is flawed in many different ways. One of the things that I do think that they get right is that a lot more positions, whether they be judges or sheriffs, etc., are directly elected.
No, this is
And
true. And I think, honestly, Topher, I think that's one of the reasons why we have seen more legal victories in the United
sure,
States courts than we have
sure.
here in Australia by, resistance people, right? Trying to get out of, vaccine mandates or whatever, or just fight against other kinds of totalitarianism, because some of those judges weren't captured, right?
Yeah,
And some of
yeah,
them, I mean, there's not a lot, but, some of them
yeah.
weren't. Here in
Some of them are.
Australia, a lot, like basically all the judges that I've known of to have heard any of these cases from the resistance have essentially just rolled over. So
Sure.
shows.
And that's been true. And look, I part of the reason why my case has dragged on as long as it has been because of us. We've been adjourning for as long as we can because we know that time is on our side. And the
Exactly.
more time that passes before I actually have to face that judge, the better things are going to be for me. I don't plan on rolling over and just simply pleading guilty and blah, blah, blah. I am going to have my day in court. I am going to plead my case and I will accept the outcome. The chips will fall where they may. However, I'm going to try and delay that for as long as possible, simply because time is on my side. Unfortunately, a lot of people have gone to trial. How do I say it? I have a lot of time for each person fighting their fight in their own way, and I don't mean to be derogatory, but some people have gone to trial very optimistically,
Yes.
very idealistically, and have ended up setting precedents that I now have to overcome.
Yes. Yes.
In order to win my trial, when they also could have done what I've done. They also could have just kept adjourning and kept on finding reasons to delay, because time is on our side. This is the nature of truth. Was it a Winston Churchill quote that said, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has time to put its pants on?
Yeah.
Like there's, but the truth in the end catches up.
Yep.
But time, when you're on the side of truth, time is on your side. And it's going to be interesting. My next court date's in January. That's just a mention hearing. I don't know how long this is going to drag on. It may drag on until late next year. I don't know. But ultimately, I hope to be able to, if not win my case, to be able to set a precedent. I won't give any more detail on that. I've got a very specific plan with my legal team of the precedent that I want to set that will then give leverage. It won't necessarily be that I win, but it may be that within the judgment, we actually set a precedent that other people are able to use that then lessens their sentences and sets it creates a stepping stone for other people to step on. Yep. So anyway, that's another story. But if we elected our judges, I do agree with you. I think we would have a sense of much greater accountability and much greater concern from our judges about the public opinion on a given issue. So, Gigi, I'm aware we're just on 2 hours now, and I don't want to abuse your generosity with your time. So consider this to be kind of the early warning bell that we're heading towards winding up. But I do want to pick your brain a little bit about where we go from here, given all of the range of things that are potentially coming at us down the pipeline that you've mentioned already. I'm in agreement with you. I'm not a doomsayer. I'm not an apocalypse type person. But I don't think that COVID is the last of the major shocks that we're going to see in our lifetime. I think there's more to come. From an economic point of view, what does a sensible person do in their own life, with their own family, in their own world, to put themselves in the best possible position for the sorts of shocks that you anticipate may be coming down the line?
Yeah. Look, I mean, it really is to focus back on your contribution in your community, in your family, in your profession, if possible. And that means speaking out. It means speaking truth. And it means continuing to be relevant, continuing to truly give value. Because if you give, right, if you give of yourself to your communities, to your family, you will survive this, right? And it is through that community strength, it is through that family strength and the strength of basically all the groups that have that the messaging during this period have tried to kind of divide that we can build again, right? It just from that strength. We need to have that strength. That is what makes a strong nation. It's not just, the halls of the power or whatever. It's literally what happens on your street corner, right? On your block, in your professional gathering, at your tennis club, right? So it is being there for each other, because when shocks happen, the best insurance is to have partnered with other people so that you can all absorb the shock together, right? That's what a family does, a large family. That's what, any kind of insurance mechanism does. You have, a large group of people and hope that not everybody's going to get shocked at once. So I would encourage people to basically adopt that attitude. And again, try in whatever way you can, locally, in your own professions, wherever, to speak out, speak the truth, speak your pain during this period, and work towards a healthier, more joyful society. I want to have dance parties. I've been wanting, every time that I go to these resistance events, I'm like, can we just like, have a dance thing, like it's just
Have a
clear,
rave.
just like, yeah, but like I just want to have fun, because that's what life is about. It's about connecting with other people and having fun. And really, we are still living in a time of incredible abundance by historical standards, right? People who lived 300 years ago would kill to be us
Yes.
right now, even with all the uncertainty, right? So appreciate that and live it, and demonstrate that this is what we want. This is what we want to be living like. We don't want to be living in a miserable, scared sort of shell of a mind and body. I'm worried about what's going to come around the next corner. I mean, that's no way to live, right? That's death before you die. So just reject that and come to a healthier understanding of death. Death is part of life. Risk is part of life, right? And adventure is what you look back on from your deathbed and you smile. And you can tell your children about it and your grandchildren about it. And you can say, I was there, I did these things, and I live to tell the tale. And I hope you have as interesting a life as I did.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure about interesting. There is that sort of Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times, which is an insult. It's intended as a curse. Now, you mentioned earlier in the slow chat, and you've just kind of brought it back up now, dancing. I was a salsa dancing, specifically LA style salsa. I was a salsa dancing instructor for a few years before I got fat and unable to dance. What's your preferred style of dance? I can't stop without asking.
Well, I was trained in classical ballet for a number of years. And then when the girls started getting hip problems and, problems with eating and stuff, I didn't like that very much because I'm very kind of a healthy girl, so I kind of shied away from that, and I became more sort of modern and jazz oriented. And then for all 4 years of university, I was in a group called Rhythmic Blue, which is a kind of hip hop, modern jazz blend fusion sort of group. And we had, people from all over doing all sorts of different qualities of dance. So, it was kind of a mix of a lot of stuff. And I like moving, I did gymnastics for a long time too. So, the flexibility really helps with the dance, and there's the coordination. And I mean, I run a lot now too, like running is my preferred exercise, but I also do a bit of, dance and run. Well, because, it keeps you fit, it keeps you fit, cardiovascularly with the running, but B, with the dancing, you stay coordinated, you stay in touch with your body. And I think there's definitely I think better and I feel better, obviously, when I'm feeling in my body. I'm feeling really in touch with my physical world. Maybe it's my father in me, right? The engineer, give me something real, right? Give me something to sink my teeth into.
Yeah. Look, I could dance for hours. At my peak, I was dancing at least 6, if not 7 days a week. If I wasn't teaching, I was out socially dancing.
Wow.
Once upon a time, I was fit, and I absolutely loved it. But I cannot stand running. I don't understand. Don't you get bored?
Well, a lot of people say that. My first husband was a marathoner. He ran 14 marathons, and his personal best was 2:52. So he actually was the one who got me into running when I was 20.
Yeah, right.
And I ran a marathon a few years ago, and I don't have the bored problem. I think I was blessed or cursed with a very, 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 very high level of mental I don't know, focus or something like control, I guess is the best word, right? So if I have to just run for 4 hours, we'll just run for 4 hours. Fine, right? It's not a problem. So it's just I just turn it on, and then I have to be able to turn it off. Of course, you can't do it forever, but being able to turn that on is very useful, right? Because then you do see when you have a stressful period, you just like right, and you do seem a little bit like a machine. Like some people have called me a robot machine, definitely. But it's just a useful skill, really.
No, look, for me, that's what cigars are for. If I need time alone with my thoughts, I sit outside with a cigar, and it doesn't involve enormous amounts of sweating and my heart rate being elevated. It's just so much better. And so you should try cigars, Gigi. This is my big takeaway from tonight's slow chat. You need to try cigars as an alternative to running. It's far less healthy. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but boy, I like it a lot better. Look, Gigi, tonight's been a pleasure, and I'm so grateful that you've given me so much of your time. We've had a great chat. You've been very enlightening, and I'm so grateful. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to kind of leave us with? Anything that's relevant to what's coming or to what's been? Anything? Any thoughts you'd like to leave us with? Obviously, it's a very friendly audience. This is my audience that are very aware of what's going on in the world today. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with? Anything that I haven't touched on yet?
I mean, I guess I just circle back to the one thing that really deeply surprised me about this era, which I wasn't foreseeing, which was the crowd psychology dynamic. And because it's something that, is new, was new in our generation with COVID, and I think has really given us an opportunity to remember that dynamic is a potential force in human lives because of our nature. And we have to always be on the lookout for that, right? That is just something that needs to be in the playbook now of, what is possible for humans. And it was, the end of the Second World War, we sort of, remembered that a little bit, or we were taught that, but then we forgot. And so now it's an opportunity to remember again. And it's not that the people who were caught up in all of this madness were psychotic. I wouldn't use that word. Desmet uses that word. I wouldn't use that. It's just, it's, 90% of people were caught up in it. So then what, 90% of people are psychotic? So then what does psychotic even mean, right? That's not, I don't feel like that's the right word, but it is true what he says, that people just, got caught up in it and just outsourced everything that normally happens in their minds around truth seeking and morality and working out what is actually happening, right? The critical thinking skills, they're all outsourced to this crowd. So to look upon the people who are not in the resistance and not see, you are evil, you are the ones that cause it, those people just need to be excised from the race, or, that's what we need to not do, that's not enough. First of all, it's wrong. And secondly, it's not enough because, it's not loving and it's not actually embracing. It's not a way to move forward together as a society. It's a way to divide ourselves further. But secondly, this is going to happen again. Like crowds are a thing. They will continue to capture people throughout history. So remember this, teach your children this, teach them to be tolerant and expect the realities of human nature to come rearing their heads out again in their generation, and to be ready and prepared, and to face that with love and respect and a willingness to work towards better institutions that minimize the damage from those kinds of dynamics.
Yeah. Look, people are leaving some wonderful comments, loving Gigi's ways of thinking, great chat. But I do want to highlight this comment. I think this is a comment of the night, in my opinion. Daniel N. Moore. Pastor Greg Bedell said to me once that laughter gives the same health benefits as running. So he bought a house where a lot of people ran past, and he would sit on the porch and laugh at them. I think that's the comment of the night. Well done, Daniel. Thank you for that. Look, for those of you that want to come by, I will be speaking at the Casey City Church in the southeast of Melbourne on Sunday. Buyer beware. I'm not saying you're going to like what I have to say. Just, I'm going to be there. I'm saying it with the blessing of the pastor of that church. And I'll be at the city. I'll be at another church. I'll publish the name on my Facebook later next week sometime in the following week. It seems as though all of a sudden I've gone from cinema showings to now churches are wanting to have me speak for some weird, bizarre reason. But that is what it is. And I'm just going to keep saying yes until no one invites me anymore. So you can see me at Casey City Church on Sunday. Professor Gigi Foster, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I've laughed so much and had just a great time. Thank you very much. Thank you for being someone who was willing to speak out so early on.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it, Topher, and I respect what you've been doing so much too. And I'm just very happy that we can connect like this, and that there are so many other people in the resistance around the country who you've been having on your show, and I've been speaking with as well. And it's a wonderful time, really, if you think of it in those terms.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is the wonderful silver lining of the crazy time that we've been through. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Gigi Foster. I'm Topher Field. Tune in next week for another slow chat. Thank you so much for joining.